A little girl pushed open gates that hadn't moved in 300 years. She begged the vampire king inside to follow her home, saying her mother was dying. What she didn't know, her bloodline was the only thing keeping him bound to humanity. And he hadn't felt his heart beat in centuries. The candle had burned for 300 years. Ravener watched the flame dance in the darkness of his throne room, barely moving, barely breathing. He didn't need to breathe anymore. The storm outside screamed against the mountain, but inside his castle, there was only silence, the kind that pressed against your ears until you forgot what voices sounded like. He had forgotten many things. The taste of wine, the warmth of sunlight, the sound of his own name spoken with love instead of terror. The castle was dying around him. Tapestries hung in rotted shreds. The ceiling had collapsed in the eastern wing 2 decades ago, and he hadn't bothered to look. What was the point? Stone crumbled. Empires fell. Everything turned to dust except him. Thunder cracked so violently the floor shook. Ravener didn't flinch. He'd stopped flinching in 1847. Then he heard it, a sound that shouldn't exist. The iron gates were opening. His head snapped up, eyes flaring red in the gloom. Those gates weighed 2 tons each and hadn't moved since the last hunter came for his head in 1692. He'd buried that hunter in the courtyard. The roses grew exceptionally well there. The sound of small, stumbling footsteps echoed through the entrance hall. Ravener rose from his throne, shadows peeling away from his body like living smoke. His hand instinctively went to his side, where a sword hadn't hung in a century. He didn't need weapons. He was the weapon. The footsteps grew closer, uneven, desperate. And then she appeared. A little girl, no older than 8, stood in the doorway of his throne room. Her dress was torn and soaked through. Mud streaked her face. Her black hair hung in wet tangles. She was shivering so hard her teeth chattered. But it was her eyes that stopped him cold. Wide. Terrified. And yet, determined. "Please," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Please, you have to help." Ravener stared at her. In 3 centuries, nothing had breached his castle walls. Not armies. Not inquisitors. Not even wild animals. The mountain itself seemed to reject life. Yet here stood a child. "How did you open the gates?" His voice came out rough and used. It sounded more like grinding stone than speech. She took a shaky step forward, and he saw her feet, bare, bleeding, leaving small red prints on his floor. I don't know. I just pushed and they opened. Please, sir, my mother is dying. I need help. There's no one else." The scent hit him then. Blood. Fresh. Human. But underneath it, something else. Something that made his dead heart clench in a way it hadn't in. He couldn't remember how long. The girl's legs gave out. She collapsed to her knees, sobbing now. "Please follow me home. I'll do anything. She's all I have. The fever won't break, and she keeps saying names I don't know," and she looked up at him with tears streaming down her face. "You're my only hope." Ravener should have killed her. That's what the old him would have done. The king who ruled with fangs and fear. But that king had died slowly, year by year, buried under centuries of nothing. He moved forward, his footsteps silent. The girl didn't run. She should have. Everyone ran from him eventually. He knelt down, bringing his face level with hers. Up close, he could see everything. The blue tint to her lips from cold, the scratches on her arms from climbing through thorns, the absolute exhaustion in her small frame. "What's your name?" he asked.
Elina.
Lena, the name felt strange on his tongue. He hadn't spoken to a living human in decades. "Why do you think I can help your mother?" She wiped her nose on her sleeve. "The old woman in the village, before she died, she told me about the castle on the mountain. She said if death itself lived anywhere, it lived here. And if death lived here," her voice dropped to a desperate whisper, "maybe it could be bargained with. Clever child. Foolish, but clever. And if I am death?" Ravener asked softly. What makes you think I bargain? Lena's hand shot out and grabbed his wrist. Her skin was ice cold, her grip weak, but there was fire in her eyes. Because death takes everyone eventually. But I think maybe you're lonely too. The word struck him like a blade. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The storm howled. The candle flickered, and Ravener felt something he thought had been carved out of him centuries ago. Curiosity. He pulled his wrist free and stood. Show me. Lena's face transformed, hope blooming across her features like sunrise. She struggled to her feet, wincing. You'll come? You'll really come? Ravener grabbed his coat from the throne, black, ancient, lined with silver thread that no longer burned him. He swung it around his shoulders. I make no promises, but I will look. She was already running for the door, energy returning to her small body. He followed, his long strides easily matching her desperate pace. As they crossed the threshold, Ravener glanced back at his throne room one last time. The candles still burned. It would burn forever, probably. A monument to nothing. He stepped out into the storm. The rain hit him like tiny knives, but he didn't feel it. Lena grabbed his hand, her small fingers wrapping around two of his, and pulled him forward. This way, down the mountain path. They descended into the darkness, lightning illuminating their path in violent flashes. Ravener's eyes adjusted instantly, seeing everything as clear as day. The girl stumbled and slipped, but kept moving, kept pulling him forward. And with every step, that strange scent grew stronger. He knew that scent.
Impossible.
But he knew it. Beneath the rain and mud and fear, underneath the child's desperate hope, there was something ancient calling to him. Something that smelled like lavender and summer storms and a name he'd sworn never to speak again.
Seline.
His dead heart began to beat. Just once. But it was enough. The village appeared through the rain like a graveyard of broken dreams. Half the houses were burned, black skeletons of wood and stone jutting into the storm-dark sky. The other half stood empty, windows shattered, doors hanging loose. Not a single light flickered in any window. Not a single voice called out. Everyone left, Lena said quietly, still pulling him forward. After the fire. After the soldiers came. They said we were cursed. Ravener's eyes swept across the destruction. The burn patterns were deliberate. Controlled. This wasn't an accident.
When?
3 weeks ago, she led him down a muddy street, past a well that had been filled with stones. They took the men first. Said they needed to be cleansed, then they burned the church. Said it was built on corrupted ground, her voice trembled. My mother hid me in the cellar. I heard the screaming. They stopped in front of a small house at the village edge, one of the few that still stood intact. But even from outside, Ravener could smell it.
Sickness. Death.
And that impossible scent. Lena pushed the door open.
Mama?
I'm back. I brought help. The interior was dark except for a single oil lamp burning low. The main room was sparse, a table, 2 chairs, a cold fireplace. A door to the left hung partially open, revealing a small bedroom. That's where the woman lay. Ravener stepped inside, and the floor creaked under his weight. He had to duck beneath the doorframe. When he straightened, his eyes locked onto the bed. Time stopped. The woman was perhaps 30, maybe younger. It was hard to tell through the fever flush on her cheeks. Dark hair spilled across the pillow, damp with sweat. Her breathing was shallow and rapid. But it was her face. Seline, he breathed. What? Lena looked up at him, confused. He couldn't move.
Couldn't think.
The face on that pillow was her. The same high cheekbones. The same elegant nose. The same small scar above the left eyebrow where she'd fallen from an apple tree as a child. But it couldn't be. He'd watched Seline die. He'd held her as her heart stopped, as her warmth faded, as she whispered his true name one last time. That was 1724. 301 years ago. He forced himself to move closer. His supernatural senses swept over the woman, analyzing, measuring, understanding. Her heartbeat was human, weak but human. Her scent, beneath the fever and sickness, was completely mortal. No trace of vampire blood. No hint of turning. But that face. That impossible face. "Her name is Elaine," Lena whispered, taking her mother's hand. "Please, can you help her?" Ravener knelt beside the bed, his trained eye catching details his heart wanted to deny. The resemblance was perfect, but there were small differences. A slightly different curve to the jaw. Eyes that would be green instead of Celine's gray. This woman was younger than Seline had been when she died. His hand hovered over Elaine's forehead, then touched gently. She was burning up. But beneath the fever, he felt something else. Something in her blood. Silver. Not ordinary silver. This was sanctified silver, the kind ground into powder and mixed with holy water by church inquisitors. The kind designed specifically to poison vampiric bloodlines. He'd seen it used before, centuries ago, to eradicate entire vampire families by poisoning their human servants and descendants. "How long has she been sick?" he asked. 5 days. It started after the soldiers left. She collapsed while we were hiding. Lena's eyes filled with tears again. "She keeps getting worse. She says things that don't make sense. Yesterday, she called me Little Shadow and said my father would be proud." Ravener's eyes narrowed. "Your father? I never knew him. Mama said he died before I was born."
But sometimes she talks about him like
he's still watching somehow. He leaned closer to Elaine, inhaling deeply. The silver poisoning was extensive. It had been building in her system for years, maybe generations. But underneath it, threaded through her very DNA, was something that made his ancient blood sing with recognition.
his bloodline. Distant.
Diluted over centuries. But unmistakable. This woman was a descendant, not of Seline. Seline had died human, but of someone connected to him, someone who had carried a trace of his essence forward through time. "Impossible," he muttered. He'd never turned anyone, never created progeny. The curse that made him king had made him sterile to his own kind. Unless... His mind raced back, through centuries. Before Seline, before the curse, when he'd still been mortal, when he'd still been. The village elders whispered about it. Lena said softly. Before they fled, they said the cursed blood has returned. They said that's why the soldiers came. To end it forever. Ravener stood abruptly, his coat swirling. The church knows. Knows what? He looked down at the little girl, at this child who had somehow opened his gates, who had pulled him from 3 centuries of numbness. That your bloodline should not exist. Outside, in the distance, he heard something that made his jaw tighten. Horses. Many of them. And the rhythmic march of booted feet. An army was coming. Ravener moved to the window in one fluid motion, his eyes cutting through the darkness like blades. On the horizon, torches flickered, dozens of them, snaking down the mountain road toward the village. "Stay quiet," he commanded, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow filled the room. "Don't light any more lamps." Lena pressed herself against her mother's bedside, nodding frantically. He had time. Maybe an hour before they arrived. He turned back to the woman on the bed, Elaine, and made a decision that surprised even himself. He was going to save her. Not because she looked like Seline. Not because of some half-remembered emotion from his breathing days. But because the church wanted her dead, and Ravener had spent 3 centuries hating the church with a purity that never dulled. "Lena," he said quietly, kneeling beside the bed again. "I need you to answer carefully. Has your mother ever told you stories about your family? About where you came from?" The girl thought for a moment.
She said,
"We're daughters of the North Wind. That our grandmothers going back forever could read the shadows and walk in dreams." She paused. "The priest said those were witch tales. Devil stories." The priest was half right. Ravener carefully lifted Elaine's wrist, studying the veins there. They were dark, too dark. The silver poisoning was spreading. "Your bloodline is old. Older than this village. Older than the church that burned it. He could see it now, tracing back through genetic memory embedded in her cells. Somewhere, 8 or 9 generations ago, one of his mortal descendants, a child born before his turning, had survived, had hidden, had passed down fragments of his essence through purely human means. The church had been hunting those fragments ever since. "Can you heal her?" Lena's voice was small, desperate. Ravener didn't answer immediately. He could heal her. One bite, one exchange of blood. But that would turn her, and a turning while poisoned with sanctified silver would either kill her instantly or create something unstable. There was another way, riskier, more delicate. "Bring me water," he said. "Clean water. And something sharp, a knife." Lena scrambled to obey, returning with a clay pitcher and a small kitchen blade. Ravener took the knife and cut his own palm without hesitation. Black blood welled up, ancient, thick with power. He let exactly 3 drops fall into the water pitcher, watching as they dissolved, turning the water a faint silver gray. "This is not a turning," he explained, more to himself than to Lena. "This is a cleansing. My blood is older than the church's poison. It will recognize the silver as an invader and destroy it. Will it hurt her?" Yes, he lifted Elaine's head gently, bringing the pitcher to her cracked lips. "But she'll live." He poured slowly. The water trickled into her mouth. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Elaine's eyes snapped open. They glowed, not red like his, but a fierce, burning gold. Her back arched off the bed. A sound tore from her throat, half scream, half something ancient and wordless. Lena grabbed his arm. "What's happening?" "The bloodlines are remembering each other," Ravena said, holding Elaine down as gently as he could while her body convulsed. "She carries my lineage. My blood recognizes hers." Black veins appeared on Elaine's skin, racing up her arms and neck like lightning. Everywhere the veins touched, the flesh began to glow faintly. The silver poison was being forced out, expelled through her pores as a fine, dark mist. Her eyes found his. And for just a moment, a single, impossible moment, she knew him. "Ravener," she whispered. Not a question. A recognition buried in genetic memory. The first, father. Then her eyes rolled back and she collapsed against the pillow, breathing hard but steady. The black veins faded. The glow dimmed. The fever broke like a wave hitting shore, leaving her pale but alive. Lena threw herself at her mother.
"Mama."
"Mama, please." Elaine's eyes fluttered open again. Normal now, green and human and confused.
"Lena? Baby what?"
Where her gaze shifted to Ravener, and her breath caught.
"Who?"
"Someone who made a promise," he said quietly, standing. "You'll be weak for a few days, but the poison is gone." Outside, the torches were closer now. He could hear voices on the wind, harsh, commanding, speaking in the old clerical tongue. "They're coming for you," he said to Elaine. "The church. They've been hunting your bloodline for centuries." She struggled to sit up, maternal instinct overriding her weakness. "Lena." "Will be protected," Ravener interrupted. His eyes flashed red in the darkness. "Both of you will be. I've lived 300 years alone in that castle. I've forgotten what it means to care about anything." He looked at Lena, this small, brave child who had climbed a mountain in a storm to save her mother. "You reminded me," he said softly, "and I do not forget twice." The first warhorse entered the village square. Ravener's fangs descended, gleaming in the lamplight. "Stay here," he commanded. "Whatever you hear, don't come outside." Dawn came cold and gray, bleeding through the clouds like a wound. Ravener had spent the night in the shadows outside Elaine's house, watching the soldiers make camp in the village square. 20 men, all wearing the black and silver of the Holy Inquisition, all armed with blessed steel and crossbows loaded with wooden bolts. They'd burned another house just for light. He'd killed men like these before.
Hundreds of them.
But that was centuries ago, when anger still lived in his veins. Now he simply watched, calculating, remembering what it meant to have something worth protecting. The sun rose higher, and he retreated into the house through a cellar window. The light wouldn't kill him. He was too old, too powerful, but it would weaken him, make him sluggish. And he needed to be sharp. Inside, Lena sat at the table, wide awake despite not sleeping. Elaine rested in the bedroom, color returning to her cheeks. "They're here," Lena whispered. "I know. Will they leave?" Ravener looked at her, this child who still believed the world could be kind.
No.
Heavy boots struck the ground outside. Multiple footsteps, moving with military precision. They stopped at the door. 3 sharp knocks. In the name of the Holy Church and by the authority of the Crimson Throne, a voice called out, "Open this door." Lena's hand found Ravener's. He squeezed gently, then released her. "Hide in the cellar. Take your mother."
Now.
But
Now.
she ran. He heard the cellar door open, heard Elaine's weak protest and Lena's fierce whisper. Then silence. Another knock, harder this time. "We know you're in there, Elaine Ashvale. Your name is written in our books. Your bloodline has been marked." Ravenna moved to the shadowed corner beside the door, pulling darkness around himself like a cloak. He became part of the wall, invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. The door burst open. 4 soldiers entered first, crossbows raised. They swept the room with practiced efficiency, checking corners, clearing sight lines. Professional. Dangerous. Then he entered. The High Inquisitor was a tall man, thin as a blade, wearing robes of white and gold. His face was young, no more than 40, but his eyes were old, ancient, the kind of eyes that had watched too many people burn. Around his neck hung a pendant, a silver cross wrapped in thorns. Ravener's jaw tightened. He recognized that pendant. He'd seen it before, centuries ago, in the hands of the man who'd first cursed him. "Empty," one soldier reported. The Inquisitor stepped fully inside, his eyes scanning methodically. "She was here recently. I can smell the sickness." He walked to the bedroom, peered inside at the unmade bed. "And something else."
Something.
"Old." He turned slowly, studying the room. His eyes passed directly over Ravener's hiding spot. Kept moving.
Stopped.
Came back. For a long moment neither moved. Then the Inquisitor smiled, cold, knowing, triumphant. "Hello, old king," he said softly. "Did you think we wouldn't recognize your presence? We've been hunting you for 300 years. Ravener didn't answer, didn't move. "You can hide from their eyes," the Inquisitor continued, gesturing to his soldiers. "But not from mine. My grandfather served you once, before you became
This."
He told me stories. Taught me the signs. He pulled out a small vial of water, uncorked it. "Where is the woman? Where is the child?" Still, Ravener said nothing. The Inquisitor sighed and splashed the water onto the floor. Where it landed, symbols began to glow. Old runes, carved into the floorboards years ago. Protection wards. Binding spells. The villagers knew, the Inquisitor explained. The woman's grandmother carved these herself, thinking they'd protect her family from divine judgment. He laughed bitterly. "Instead, they just helped us track her bloodline. These wards don't protect from us, old king. They protect from you." The symbols flared brighter, and Ravener felt them, silver threads of power trying to lock him in place, trying to bind him to the shadows. They were strong, surprisingly strong. But he was stronger. "Last chance," the Inquisitor said. "Tell me where they are, and I'll make your final death quick. Refuse, and I'll burn this entire village. I'll dig through every cellar until I find that cursed child." From beneath the floor, Ravener heard the faintest sound. Lena's heartbeat, racing with fear. The Inquisitor heard it too. His smile widened.
"Ah.
There." He gestured to 2 soldiers. "Tear up the floorboards." They moved forward, raising their weapons. And Ravener made his choice. The shadows exploded. He materialized in the center of the room, the binding wards shattering like glass around him. His eyes blazed crimson, his fangs fully extended, his presence filling every corner of the small house with suffocating power. "You want the child?" His voice was death itself, echoing with the weight of centuries. "You'll have to go through me first." The Inquisitor's smile never faltered. He raised his hand, and suddenly every soldier drew identical weapons from their belts. Silver daggers, forged in the shape of ribs. His ribs. "We were hoping you'd say that," the Inquisitor whispered. The first soldier lunged. Ravener moved like lightning through water, faster than human eyes could track. His hand caught the soldier's wrist, twisted, and the silver dagger clattered to the floor. The man screamed as Ravener threw him through the doorway into the muddy street. But the other three were already attacking. Silver burned where it touched him. Not enough to kill, but enough to hurt. Real, searing pain that he hadn't felt in decades. He dodged left, then right, his coat shredding as a blade caught fabric instead of flesh. "Careful," the Inquisitor barked. "We need him conscious." Ravener's eyes narrowed. They weren't trying to kill him. They were trying to capture him. That was their first mistake. He stopped retreating. Shadows poured from his body like smoke, filling the room, extinguishing the morning light. In the darkness, he was God. The soldiers' blessed crossbows fired blind, bolts whistling past him, embedding in walls. One soldier's scream cut short. Then another. When Ravener released the shadows, 2 soldiers lay unconscious, and the third was backing toward the door, his silver dagger trembling in his hand. Only the Inquisitor remained calm, standing in the center of the room with his arms crossed. "Impressive. But you're weaker than the stories claimed. 3 centuries of isolation have made you soft. Leave," Ravener growled. "While you still can." "We both know I can't do that." The Inquisitor reached into his robes and pulled out a scroll, ancient, yellowed with age. "Do you know what this is? It's your lineage, Vampire King. Every human child born from your mortal bloodline before you were cursed. We've been tracking them for 300 years, erasing them, poisoning them." He smiled coldly. "Elaine Ashvale and her daughter are the last ones. When they're gone, you'll be truly alone.
No descendants.
No connection to humanity. Just a monster in an empty castle." Something twisted in Ravener's chest. "Why?" "Because that was the curse's purpose." The Inquisitor's voice rose with fervor. "You were never meant to be a king. You were meant to be a weapon, bound to humanity by blood, unable to ascend to true godhood. As long as one descendant lived, you'd feel them, dream of them, be haunted by them." He stepped closer. "The Church created you, Ravener, and now we're going to unmake you." The floorboards behind them creaked. The cellar door was opening. "No, Ravener, breathe. Stay down." But Lena was already climbing out, her small face set with determination. "Leave him alone." The Inquisitor spun, drawing a silver dagger in one smooth motion. The child herself. Even better. Everything happened at once. The Inquisitor lunged toward Lena. Ravener moved faster than thought itself, shadows propelling him forward. But as he crossed the threshold where the protection wards had been, pain exploded through his body, the residual magic activating, trying to hold him back. He pushed through anyway. His hand caught the Inquisitor's wrist inches from Lena's throat. For a moment, they were frozen, the Inquisitor's eyes wide with shock, Ravener burning with fury. "You should have stayed in your castle," the Inquisitor hissed. Then he twisted the dagger downward, driving it into his own chest. Blood sprayed, not the Inquisitor's blood, but something else. Something that had been stored in the hollow blade. Holy oil mixed with liquefied silver, blessed by 50 priests over 50 years. It splashed across Ravener's face, burning like acid. He roared, stumbling back. His skin bubbled and smoked where the oil touched. For the first time in 3 centuries, he felt something close to mortal agony. The Inquisitor collapsed, gasping from a self-inflicted wound, but still smiling.
The trap.
Was always you. Outside, more soldiers were coming. Ravener could hear them, dozens of boots striking ground. The entire army had been waiting for his reveal. Through the pain, through the burning, he heard another sound. A crash from the bedroom. Elaine had collapsed again. Lena screamed and ran to her mother. Ravener forced his eyes open, forced himself to move. Through his supernatural vision, he saw what was happening. The stress, the fear, the lingering traces of his blood in her system. It was all combining, accelerating. Elaine's body was trying to turn, trying to complete a transformation that should have taken weeks. But it was happening wrong. Too fast. Too violent.
Nana.
Lena cradled her mother's head as Elaine convulsed, her eyes flickering between human green and supernatural gold. Ravener made a decision. He bit his wrist, tearing deep, and pressed it to Elaine's lips. "Drink," he commanded. Not to turn. Just to stabilize. Just to survive. His blood poured into her mouth. This time, when her eyes opened, they blazed with light, not vampire red, but something new. Something that was both human soul and ancient power, perfectly balanced. The transformation stopped, locked in place. Neither human nor vampire, but something in between. Elaine gasped, fully conscious now, glowing faintly with inner light. "What? What did you do?" "Saved you," Ravener said simply. He pulled Lena close with his other arm. "Both of you." The front wall exploded inward. Soldiers poured through, crossbows raised. The Inquisitor was being helped to his feet, still smiling despite his wound. "Nowhere to run, old king," he whispered. Ravener looked down at Lena, at this brave, impossible child who'd reminded him what it meant to care. Then he looked at Elaine, glowing with his light. Who said anything about running? He lifted them both and crashed through the back wall, shadows exploding behind them as the house collapsed. They ran into the forest. The hunt had begun. The forest swallowed them whole. Ravener moved through the trees like a ghost, carrying Lena in one arm while Elaine stumbled alongside them, her new strength keeping pace despite her exhaustion. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew louder. Dogs barking, men shouting, horses crashing through undergrowth. "How far?" Elaine gasped, her breath coming in white clouds. 2 miles north, Ravener replied, not even winded. "There's an old monastery, abandoned for a century, but the catacombs still stand. We can lose them there." Lena tightened her grip around his neck. "Why are they so afraid of us?" It was a child's question. Simple.
Direct.
The kind that demanded truth. Ravener leaped over a fallen log, landing soundlessly on the other side. "Because your bloodline is proof that monsters can love. And if monsters can love, they can be reasoned with, negotiated with. The church prefers their enemies simple, pure evil, easy to destroy." "Are you evil?" Lena asked quietly.
He thought about that.
300 years ago, he would have said yes without hesitation. He'd done terrible things, killed hundreds, ruled through fear. But somewhere in those centuries of silence, the evil had drained away, leaving only emptiness. Until now. "I was," he finally answered.
Once.
"A long time ago. But not anymore. Not today." An arrow whipped past his head, embedding in a tree trunk. The soldiers were getting closer. Elaine stumbled, and Ravener caught her with his free arm. Her skin was still glowing faintly, pulsing with that strange light. She looked at him with eyes that held too much understanding. "I know you," she whispered. "Not from this life. From
Deeper.
when you gave me your blood, I saw things. Memories that aren't mine." "Your ancestor," Ravener said. "She loved you," Elaine's voice was certain. "Whoever she was, she loved you completely. I can feel it, like an echo in my bones." They burst through a thicket into a small clearing. There, Half hidden by overgrown vines and centuries of neglect, stood the monastery, a massive stone structure with a collapsed roof and walls covered in moss. There, Ravener pointed. The entrance to the catacombs is through the main hall. They ran for it. Behind them, the first soldier broke through the tree line. There at the old monastery. More soldiers poured into the clearing.
Crossbows fired.
Ravener felt a bolt graze his shoulder. Blessed wood, burning where it touched. He gritted his teeth and kept running. They crashed through the monastery's broken doors, just as a dozen soldiers reached the clearing. Ravener spun, his eyes blazing, and pulled shadows from every corner of the ruined building. They formed a wall of darkness across the entrance, not solid, but enough to make the soldiers hesitate. "The catacombs," he said urgently.
Now.
Elaine grabbed Lena's hand, and they ran deeper into the monastery. The main hall was a disaster. Pews rotted to splinters, the altar cracked in half, stained glass windows shattered. But beneath the altar, visible through gaps in the stone, was a staircase leading down. They descended into darkness. The temperature dropped immediately. The air grew thick with the smell of old earth and older death. Ravener's eyes adjusted instantly, but Elaine and Lena were blind. He took Lena's other hand. "Stay close. The catacombs are a maze." "Why did you come here?" Elaine asked as they moved through narrow stone corridors lined with burial niches. "Before, when you were still mortal." Ravener paused, surprised. "How did you?" "I told you. I can feel your memories. Pieces of them, at least." Her voice echoed softly in the darkness. "This place meant something to you." He was quiet for a long moment, leading them deeper into the earth. Finally, he spoke. "I was married here. Before the curse. Before everything." His voice was barely a whisper. "Her name was Seline. She was a priestess. Young, brilliant, kind. She believed I could be better than the warlord I was becoming." "What happened to her?" Lena asked. "I tried to save her from plague by making her like me, but the curse rejected her. She died in my arms, screaming, her body tearing itself apart." He stopped walking. "The church used her death as the catalyst for my curse. Her suffering bound me to humanity forever. They made sure I'd never forget what I destroyed." Above them, soldiers were entering the monastery. Footsteps echoed through stone. Ravener led them around a corner, into a wider chamber. And there, on the wall, he saw it. A mural. Ancient. Faded. But unmistakable. It showed a man in armor kneeling before a woman in priestess robes. Behind them, figures in shadow, church elders, watching. And above it all, painted in gold that still somehow gleamed. The binding of the Shadow King. Elaine stepped closer, her glow illuminating details. "This is you. And her."
Yes.
"But look," she pointed to the priestess's hand. In it she held a small vial. "She's holding something. What is that?" Ravener moved closer, his ancient eyes seeing what time had tried to hide. The vial in the painting contained blood. His blood. But the date on the mural was wrong. This wasn't from their wedding. This was from before he was cursed. "No," he breathed. "That's impossible. Seline died, fighting the curse." "She didn't. She couldn't have." Footsteps on the stairs above. The Inquisitor's voice calling out, "There's nowhere left to run, old king." But Ravener wasn't listening anymore. He was staring at the mural, at the truth painted in pigment and lies. Seline hadn't been killed by the curse. She'd helped create it. The world tilted. 300 years of grief, rage, and isolation, all built on a lie. "She betrayed me," Ravener whispered, his voice hollow. "She helped them." Elaine touched the mural gently, her fingers tracing the painted vial. "Look closer. Look at her face." He didn't want to, but he forced himself to see. Celine's expression in the painting wasn't triumphant. It wasn't cruel.
It was
heartbroken. Her eyes, even rendered in faded paint, held nothing but sorrow. "She's crying," Lena said softly, pointing to small gold tears painted on Seline's cheeks. Ravener's hands clenched into fists. Why would she do it? If she loved me, why would she? Because you were becoming something terrible, a new voice interrupted. They spun around. An old woman stood in the corridor behind them, leaning on a gnarled staff. She was impossibly ancient, skin like parchment, eyes milky with cataracts. But she moved with surprising steadiness as she stepped into the chamber. Who are you? Ravener growled, positioning himself between her and his companions. The last keeper of truths, the woman said. I've been waiting in these catacombs for 60 years, knowing eventually you'd come. My grandmother was the one who painted this mural. She tapped her staff against the stone. She was there. She saw everything. Above them, soldiers were spreading through the monastery. Time was running out. Speak quickly, Ravener commanded. The old woman smiled sadly. You were a warlord, vampire king. Brilliant, powerful, and completely without mercy. You were conquering everything. Entire kingdoms fell before you. But then you fell in love with Seline, and something changed. You started to feel remorse.
Guilt.
You were becoming human again. She moved closer to the mural. The church saw an opportunity. If you became fully human, you'd be vulnerable, killable. But you were also on the verge of something far worse. Transcendence. Another few years of conquest and bloodshed, and you would have accumulated enough power to become something beyond vampire. A god of death itself. Ravener's breath caught. He'd felt it back then. The power building inside him, demanding release. Seline made a choice, the old woman continued. She worked with the church to create a curse, not to kill you, but to bind you, to lock you between human and God, forever feeling but never dying, powerful but never transcendent. She used her own blood and yours to forge the binding. And then she let me try to turn her, Ravener said bitterly, knowing it would kill her. Yes, the old woman's voice was gentle. She sacrificed herself to make the curse permanent. Her death infused it with grief, the strongest binding emotion. You would carry that grief forever, unable to forget, unable to become the monster you'd been, or the god you were becoming. Elaine stepped forward. Then what are we? Why does our bloodline matter? The old woman turned to her, and something like hope flickered in her clouded eyes. Before the curse, Seline was pregnant. She'd just discovered it the day she made her choice. The church didn't know, or they would have killed the child immediately. The revelation hit like thunder. She hid her pregnancy, the woman continued. Gave birth in secret, gave the child to her sister to raise. That child carried Ravener's mortal bloodline, not vampire, just potential. The church has been hunting those descendants ever since, trying to eliminate the last threads binding Ravener to humanity. Ravener staggered back. I have a bloodline.
A family line.
All this time. And now only two remain. The old woman looked at Lena, the child, and her mother, who carries just enough of your essence to bridge two worlds. Footsteps echoed down the stairs. The Inquisitor's voice rang out. Find them. Search every chamber. The old woman tapped her staff 3 times on the floor. A section of wall beside the mural ground open, revealing a hidden passage. This leads to the sanctuary vault, where Seline hid her most precious creation. She pressed something into Ravener's hand. A key, made of bone.
Go. Quickly.
The Inquisitor carries a weapon forged from your own rib, stolen from your body 3 centuries ago while you slept. It's the only thing that can truly kill you. Why help us? Elaine asked. Because Seline was my great-great-grandmother. This is my family's debt to pay, the old woman smiled. She didn't betray you, Vampire King. She saved you. And now I'm saving what she loved most, your chance at redemption. Ravener wanted to say something, but there were no words. He grabbed Lena and Elaine and pulled them into the passage. Behind them, the old woman stepped into the corridor, raising her staff. Come then, holy soldiers. Let me show you what the last keeper of truths can do. Her voice turned into a chant. Old words, forbidden words. The passage door ground shut just as the first soldiers burst into the chamber. They ran through darkness, following the passage deeper into the earth. And ahead, Ravener could sense it, the sanctuary vault. Whatever Seline had hidden there, they were about to discover it. The key burned in his palm, hot as forgiveness. The passage ended at a massive iron door covered in symbols Ravener hadn't seen in 3 centuries. His symbols, the marks of his house, from before the curse. He pressed the bone key into the lock. It turned with a sound like a sigh, and the door swung open. The sanctuary vault was small, barely larger than Elaine's bedroom, but it took his breath away. The walls were covered in writings, Seline's handwriting, preserved by magic. Letters, hundreds of them, all addressed to him. My dearest Ravener, if you're reading this, then my plan worked. You're still alive, still bound, still capable of love. Lena ran to the center of the room where a stone pedestal stood. On it rested a small wooden box, and beside it, a portrait. Seline's face smiled out from the canvas, her hand resting on her barely visible pregnant belly. She looks like Mama, Lena whispered. Ravener couldn't speak. He moved to the pedestal, his hands trembling as he opened the box. Inside was a lock of dark hair, his, from when he was still mortal. And beneath it, a letter. My love, I know you will hate me for what I've done. Perhaps that hate will last centuries. But know this, I did not choose the church over you. I chose the world over the monster you were becoming. I chose our child over the god of death you would have been. You were not evil, my darling. You were lost. And the only way to save you was to bind you to the one thing you never learned how to lose, love itself. Our daughter will live. Her children will live. Through them, you will always have a reason to feel, to care, to remain connected to humanity. You may hate me for this gift, but I pray that one day you will understand. I die willingly, knowing that somewhere in the centuries ahead, you might finally forgive yourself. And perhaps forgive me. Forever yours, Seline. A tear fell onto the letter. Ravener touched his face in shock. He hadn't cried in 300 years. She loved you, Elaine said softly, reading over his shoulder. Everything she did was love. Above them, an explosion rocked the monastery. The soldiers were breaking through. We have to keep moving, Ravener said, but his voice cracked. There's no other way out, Elaine replied, looking around the vault. This is the end of the passage. Lena tugged his coat. Then we fight. He looked at this child, his descendant, 9 generations removed but carrying his blood nonetheless. He looked at Elaine, glowing with the balance of human and vampire, alive because he'd chosen to save her. For 300 years, he'd been waiting to die. Now, for the first time, he wanted to live. But he could hear them coming, dozens of soldiers. And the Inquisitor, carrying that weapon forged from his own rib bone, the only thing that could end him permanently. Ravener made his decision. He grabbed Elaine and Lena, pulling them close. Listen carefully. In 30 seconds, this vault will fill with my power. It will burn away every trace of my bloodline from you both. You'll become fully human again. No trace of vampire essence. Nothing for the church to hunt.
No. Lena grabbed his arm. You can't. You'll live normal lives. Long lives. Happy lives. He touched her cheek gently. That's what Seline wanted. That's what I want. There has to be another way, Elaine protested. There isn't, he smiled, truly smiled for the first time in centuries. But this isn't defeat. This is choice. Seline chose to bind me to love. Now I choose to set you free from my curse. The vault door exploded inward. The Inquisitor stood in the opening, his white robes stained with the old woman's blood. In his hand, he held a dagger made from bone, Ravener's own rib, sanctified and sharpened. Finally, the Inquisitor breathed. The end of the Shadow King's line.
Ravena stepped forward, placing himself between the Inquisitor and his family. His family? You want to end my bloodline? Ravener's voice was calm, certain. You already have. I'm the last one who carries the curse. When I die, it dies with me. He lunged forward faster than the Inquisitor could react, impaling himself on the bone dagger. Pain exploded through him, real, final, absolute. The dagger wasn't just piercing his flesh, it was unmaking him, erasing the curse from existence.
No!
Lena screamed. Ravener grabbed the Inquisitor's wrist, holding the blade inside himself. His power erupted outward in a wave of pure light, not shadow, but brilliant, cleansing radiance. It washed over Elaine and Lena, and he felt his essence leave them. The bloodline breaking. The curse ending. They would be human. Truly human.
Free.
The light consumed the Inquisitor, who screamed as holy fire, real holy fire, not the Church's twisted version, burned him away to nothing. The soldiers in the corridor fled, their weapons melting in the pure power of Ravener's final act. He collapsed, Seline's letter still clutched in his hand. Elaine and Lena ran to him, but he was already fading, turning to ash. Thank you, he whispered, looking at Lena, for reminding me what it means
to be
human. The word never came, but Lena understood. She held his hand as he dissolved into silver dust, carried away on a wind that smelled of lavender and summer storms. 16 years later, Lena stood at the ruins of the mountain castle, now overgrown with crimson roses that bloomed even in winter. She was 24 now, a scholar studying ancient histories at the university. She'd learned the full truth over the years. About Ravener, about Seline, about the love that transcended death and curse and time itself. Every dawn, she visited. Every dawn, she left fresh flowers. And on her birthday, as the sun rose, she heard his voice, not with her ears, but in her heart, in her blood, in the genetic memory that still carried traces of who he'd been. I was never your monster, little one. I was always your family. She smiled, tears on her cheeks, and whispered back, I know, Father. I know. The roses bloomed brighter. And in the castle ruins, for just a moment, a shadow stood beside her, tall, proud, and finally at peace. Then it faded into the dawn. The end.